Hey guys, it's Damien here, and I think it's about time we start wiring up these high voltage batteries for my motorcycle. Let's get to it. So, this is what the battery setup will look like prior to installing the cables to the battery terminals, and on the side here with all the yellow hard heat shrink, those will be the charging cables, and then on the other side it will be the cables that will be to plug into the motorcycle. So on one side, I'm having it plug into the motorcycle, and then once that is disconnected, the circuit of the 96-volt setup, all these batteries will be configured in 4 sets of 6S batteries that will be used on my iCharger, and then I'll be using these terminals, positive and negative, to charge up to 30 to 50 amps per battery pack because I'm not going to be using a BMS system. So that's kind of what I'll kind of start up with. And just to give you guys an idea, I will be taking this hard heat shrink off because I'm not going to be crimping them. I will actually be soldering the cable and then heat shrinking them just like so. This is a cable I made because originally when I put this together, I had to balance each battery set up because they weren't completely balanced. All the cells weren't evenly balanced. But pretty much I'm going to make a set of these cables. That's what this cable is. I made this to charge, but essentially I'm going to make the exact same cables across each battery pack. As you can see, there's 4 on this side and then 4 on the second set of batteries. And I realized that the length that I'll be using on for charging will be about 5 inches in length, and the cable that I'll be using is let's see if I can get it up close here. It is a 12 gauge wire cable, 200 degrees Celsius. It's a RC wire. That's the nice silicone brand. So these will be able to handle some high current if I need a charge. And worst case scenario, I pretty much replace the cables to a thicker cable if need be. Now for the wire, or pretty much the cable that I'll be using for the batteries, I'll be using a 4 gauge welding cable. So I bought about 20 feet of it, and I think at the moment I'll probably use about a foot per terminal just to give me enough length. I have bought plenty just in case if something goes wrong I could recrimp the cable, and I have plenty of these lugs. But that's pretty much going to be the setup with this cover on. So that's what the setup's going to look like, and let's get to cutting some cable. So before I start crimping any of my cables, I wanted to show you that if you buy cable that similar to this is a 4 gauge cable that I bought from Home Depot, and it is welding wire. And you can tell that it has some sort of dedicated curve to it already. And the reason I bring this up is because when you cut your cables, there is this curve to them. So when you're going to start crimping your lugs on the ends of these cables, you definitely want to make sure you have the correct orientation. Because if you don't have the correct orientation, when crimping these cables, and one of them might be opposite or flipped around the wrong way versus how the battery is put into the motorcycle, you might be going against the curve of the cable, which creates a ton of strain. So let's just quickly look at my batteries just to see the type of setup I'm actually going to have before crimping these lugs. These are 4 gauge lugs that has a quarter 20-inch through hole, and these are your Anderson power poles that can handle up to 175 amps. So here's my completed battery pack. Well, partially completed, but as far as the protection of it goes, on the left column here of terminals, I will be using a charging cable that I have built, and it will be installed and assembled on the left-hand side here on both sets of batteries. And then on the right side, on each battery pack, I will be assembling the 4 gauge cable. So, as I showed you guys before, here is my cut cable, and the lugs that will be assembled onto these terminals, and then your Anderson connectors that will be coming out of the battery into the connector of this housing here. Now, I have already laid out how I want this battery to look when it's assembled. And so looking at the red lead, the positive terminal is up top, and then the negative terminal, since I have the darker wire below, this is the negative side. So with these 4 gauge lugs, copper lugs, I will be assembling the lugs similar to what you see here. One of them will be oriented like this on the positive side, and then the negative side, the orientation will look like this. I'm pretty much putting it into the gap just so it can kind of hold that orientation. Now, knowing that this is the back side of the motorcycle and this is the front side of the motorcycle, my APT controller will be on this side. So that being said, these cables, keeping the curve or trying to hold the curve of the cable, I will have the cables coming off the battery like this. So knowing, I know these are both red cables, I'll eventually put some heat shrink so that I could know which cable is the positive, which cable is the negative. But just to lower the camera here a little bit. Now, looking at the positive side, the copper lug will be oriented like facing down, and the negative copper lug will be facing up. And on top of that, I need to know the orientation of the lugs of these Anderson power pole terminals with the housing. So I kind of want the housing to look like this when it's all crimped up. So when you look inside the housing, there's these metal tabs here. And these metal tabs here are actually something that latches on to this. I'm not sure if you could, I'm trying to do my best to see if you could see it, but there's this edge here that it clips onto, and it holds itself into this housing. So once these are crimped onto the side of the cable like that, you pretty much take these and slide them into the housing, and then these will bend down, and then your terminal will be latched into place. So if you ever need to take these apart, you try to pry that down, and then you would be able to take this terminal out if you had to do that. But they're pretty much kind of in an orientation where it springs up, so it kind of holds this terminal in. But back to the orientation, knowing that this terminal has to be facing with the tabs facing that way, I want my housing to be faced that way. So that means the tabs are facing outward. So or I'm sorry, downward, where they would latch onto the terminal like this. So these Anderson terminals would have to face with the edge part of it down. So I'm going to do my best to hold this, but here is the negative connector. So I would need to have the edge facing down on the Anderson. Oh, sorry. That's how it should be. The edge facing down like this, and the lug for the negative end facing up. So that's essentially what it would look like. And then on the positive side, I would rotate this and then connect it that way. That way I'm not going against the curve of this 4-gauge cable. So the one last thing I need to do is pretty much create a slot on the top side of these covers so that I have a way to access these balance leads. So after that long conversation of making sure that you are following the curve of the cable to where you want it to go, well, I accidentally forgot one big detail, and that is having the connector next to the terminals and making sure that they're properly assembled the way I need the direction to go. And unfortunately, in this case, it's not going in the direction I need it to go. So if you look at here, this is the positive side and this is the negative side. But in order to put this Anderson connector housing into these terminals, it has to be flipped this way. So this is the negative side, that's the positive side. So unfortunately, in this scenario, I'm gonna have to swap these, and they would pretty much be assembled just like that. One thing I could technically do if I wanted to change this and not have this crossover is to swap these two cables. That way they're pretty much flipped right side up just like this, but in this orientation. The only thing that I would have to change is the heat shrink. This would have to be red, this would have to be black, and so on and so forth. But the one downside to this is I need these cables to curve towards the APT motor controller. So if I were to change the cables to look like this without this crossover, the cables would then start to curve towards the backside of the motorcycle, which is not where I want the cables and the connectors to go. So unfortunately, in this case, I'm going to have to swap. I'm going to have this crossover. It's not that big of a deal, but like I said before, these are just the small little details that need to be paid attention to prior to crimping all your cables. And I even tried to make sure 5 to 10 times to make sure everything was correct. But just to give you a hint, follow the curve of the cable, make sure the lugs are going in the direction you need them to go, and as well as these terminals for the Anderson power poles, and making sure that the connector is facing where you need it to go. But let's just keep building. So one final touch is a 3D printed design I created to put onto these cable crimps. And what this does is it allows me to have these charging cables not swing around like this when I'm riding the motorcycle. So I have these really nice overhang hooks that I put into it and a loop for the cables to kind of slide right in. So let's quickly assemble this. Goes on like that. And then you just snug it up. And there you have it. Let's just do the rest. It's a very nice, convenient design. So I don't have to worry about these moving around so much. And these cables are mostly for charging anyway. So whenever I need to pull them out, they'll be right there. Awesome. Last one. Perfect. Now I don't have to worry about them moving around so much. So these batteries ended up turning out much better than expected. It took quite some time to get them completed, but all in all, everything fit just perfectly after making some modifications to the housings, as well as wiring up all the cables. One of the items I actually assembled incorrectly when building this motorcycle battery is crimping the 4-gauge cable. What I realized is I was actually pinching the sides of the Anderson power pole terminals. Instead, they should have been completely compressed. So I had to increase the size gauge for the hydraulic press, and I was able to fix all of them right on the spot. Now, if you have any questions about the build of my battery, just comment down below. But if you guys like this type of content, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.